I followed my stepmother into the imperial palace for a banquet I had no business attending, and within minutes, I accidentally heard the most arrogant inner voice I had ever encountered in my entire life. The Prime Minister's daughter isn't even pretty. She looks nothing like Huan Huan. And why is General Tang's daughter walking like that? Is it because her surname means stumble? I pressed my lips together so hard they turned white. But it was no use. A laugh burst out of me like water through a cracked pot. Small, quiet, just enough for one very dangerous pair of eyes to find me instantly. Whose fool is that? Smiling like a blooming chrysanthemum. Chrysanthemum. He called my face a chrysanthemum. I was 19 years old with smooth, unblemished skin and absolutely zero wrinkles, and this wicked prince had the nerve to compare my smile to an old crinkled flower. I was so offended I forgot for a full 3 seconds to be frightened. Then I remembered where I was and who he was, and the fright came back in full. That is how my completely ordinary, carefully planned, perfectly unremarkable life fell apart in the span of one poorly timed laugh. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome to Lotus Tale Studios. We bring you the most dramatic, heartwarming, and absolutely chaotic ancient romance stories you never knew you needed. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single upload. We post new stories every week, and trust me, you do not want to fall behind on this one. Now, let us get back to Lin Mei and her very unfortunate superpower. My name is Lin Mei, and I am the second daughter of a 4th-rank official. My father Lin Shan held a quiet post in the Ministry of Records. We were respectable without being powerful, comfortable without being influential. The kind of family that attended imperial banquets only because my stepmother Madame Chen had a cousin who entered the palace years ago as a consort and once, in a moment of either generosity or calculation, mentioned our family name to the right person. That cousin, consort Yao, had a long tangled history with my stepmother that neither woman ever explained. When her name came up in conversation, smiles went careful and words went short. So when the gilded invitation arrived at our doorstep, my stepmother picked it up, read it twice, set it down on the table, and let out the sigh of a woman who suspects she is being used for something but cannot yet determine what. The banquet was officially described as a gesture of goodwill and unity between the imperial family and the people of the capital. But everyone with functioning ears understood the real purpose. The empress wanted to select a wife for her youngest son, Prince Yang, who had only recently returned to the palace after spending most of his life being raised far outside it. He was said to be wild in temperament, unpredictable in behavior, completely uninterested in the rules that governed palace life, and deeply unsuited to most situations that required either patience or diplomacy. The banquet was the polished, acceptable way of presenting candidates to the empress without anyone having to acknowledge out loud that was precisely what was happening. My elder sister Shen, who was 21 and had the finely developed self-preservation instincts of a very clever cat walking beside a fire, took one look at the invitation and announced she had urgent matters to attend to elsewhere. "You should go, Mai," she said with complete and untroubled cheerfulness, already backing toward the door. "You will get to see the palace. The architecture alone is worth the journey." "Jijia," I said. "The main hall pillars are painted with real gold leaf. Can you imagine? Real gold. Jijia. And the empress's private garden supposedly has a pond with fish the size of your forearm. You have always liked fish. You are running away." She grinned at me with not a trace of shame. "I am completely and deliberately running away. But think about your situation carefully. You are of age but from too modest a family for the empress to seriously consider. Nobody at that banquet is going to look twice at a young woman from a 4th-rank household sitting quietly in the back corner. Just go, sit quietly, eat well, admire the gold pillars, and come straight home. Simple. Effortless. Nothing will happen." She was gone before I could form a single word of counter-argument. My stepmother spent 2 full days searching for her. Our servants checked every corner of the estate, the morning market, 3 tea houses near the academy, the riverside docks, and the home of every friend Shun had ever casually mentioned. My sister had vanished as completely as smoke in a strong wind. By the morning of the banquet, Madame Chen had accepted the situation with tight-lipped practicality, straightened my collar, pressed a firm hand to my shoulder, and delivered the words I would replay many times in the weeks that followed. You are only going to watch. With your father's rank, the empress will not look in our direction. Sit quietly, eat nothing that might stain your dress, speak to no one unless spoken to first, and do not draw attention to yourself. Do not draw attention to yourself. For very clear words. I genuinely, sincerely tried. Because of my father's rank, our seats were in the very last section of the great banquet hall, tucked behind rows of second and third rank noble families who all seemed to have known each other since before they could walk. They moved between tables with the ease of people who had been doing this their whole lives, sharing dishes, laughing at references that went back years, leaning close to whisper things that made their neighbors gasp and cover their smiles. There was a comfortable, effortless intimacy to all of it, the intimacy of people who belong somewhere so completely that the thought of not belonging has never once occurred to them. My stepmother and I sat in our corner with a small plate of melon seeds between us, eating slowly and saying very little, two people who had walked into the wrong garden and were trying very hard to look like they had intended to be there all along. After a while, the noise of so many overlapping conversations pressed against the inside of my head like the beginning of a headache. I had never enjoyed large crowds. I was counting the painted beams across the ceiling and thinking about how much I would enjoy being somewhere else when a voice arrived inside my head that had not come through my ears at all. It came from somewhere deeper. Like a thought that was not mine had walked through an unlocked door, sat down without asking, and made itself completely at home. Why am I here? Of all the places I could be right now. Someone in this palace is going to answer for this decision. Is that woman's headdress meant to look like a bird? It genuinely looks like she lost a fight with a bird and the bird is still attached. I looked around carefully. There was no man anywhere near our table. The voice had not come from any direction I could identify. The Prime Minister's daughter isn't even pretty. She looks nothing like Huan. And why is General Tang's daughter walking like that? Is it because her surname means stumble? These are the candidates. If I have to choose from this room, I am going to be very upset with a great many people. A sharp formal announcement cut across the hall and every single person around me folded into a bow with the synchronized smoothness of people who had rehearsed this many times before. Her Majesty the Empress arrives. His Highness Prince Yang arrives. I bowed with everyone else, but my curiosity pushed my chin up a fraction too early, the way I always did when curiosity overruled caution. The Empress moved through the hall the way powerful rivers move, with a certainty so complete that everything around her seemed to have arranged itself specifically to accommodate her passage. Her phoenix crown caught the light from 100 lamps and returned it brighter. She carried the full weight of her position without appearing to carry anything at all. Beside her walked Prince Yang. I want to be honest about this because I think it matters for understanding everything that came after. Prince Yang was the most unreasonably, inconveniently beautiful person I had encountered in my 19 years of life. His features were the kind that painters argued over and then despaired of capturing correctly. Sharp and clean and balanced in a way that was difficult to look at directly for too long. He walked with one hand loosely at his side and wore an expression of such complete, settled, genuine boredom that it was clearly real and deeply felt. He looked like someone who would rather be absolutely anywhere else in the known world. And his thoughts, which had apparently decided to become my responsibility without asking my permission, continued without pause. Look at this room. Every single person in it has decided in advance what they are here to be and is performing it with tremendous effort. Not one real expression in the entire hall. The Prime Minister's daughter isn't even pretty. She looks nothing like Huan. That is when I made my mistake. Because the image of General Tang's famously fierce daughter, the daughter of the man who had personally held the northern border against 3 separate invasions and whose name made officers straighten their spines involuntarily, being silently mocked for the way she walked by this velvet-robed, perfectly arranged, apparently never inconvenienced by anything prince struck me as so completely and specifically absurd that the laugh came before I had the faintest chance of stopping it. It was not a large laugh. It was small and brief, the kind that escapes through a gap you did not know existed. But the hall was quiet enough in that moment, and Prince Yang had the kind of attention that found anomalies automatically, the way a hawk finds movement in still grass. That gaze landed on me. Deliberate and immediate. It was the kind of look that reminded you, without any particular malice but with complete clarity, That the person doing the looking occupied a position in the world where consequences traveled in only one direction. Whose fool is that? Laughing like a blooming chrysanthemum. Chrysanthemum. Crinkled autumn flowers associated with mourning ceremonies and old age. I was 19 years old with perfectly smooth skin, and he had just compared my smile to a funeral flower because I was sitting far enough away that he could not see me clearly, and had apparently decided to insult me anyway. The offense was so specific and so unnecessary that for one full moment it completely overrode my fear. Then his eyes sharpened into something else entirely. She heard me. She actually heard me. That is not possible. The last person who could hear my thoughts has had grass growing over them for 2 years. If this woman heard me, then she cannot leave this banquet with that information. She absolutely cannot. Oh no. I stared back at him because I was already in trouble, and adding frightened to the list of things he could see in me was not going to improve my situation. I kept my face blank and my eyes level. Our eyes met. His were sharp and assessing and entirely focused. Mine were, I hoped with considerable desperation, calm. Ordinary looking, he thought. Then, with what sounded almost like surprise, but she is not flinching. Interesting. He set his wine cup down slowly. He turned to the empress seated beside him. Mother, he said. Then he raised his hand and pointed. Directly across the hall. Directly at me. Ha! I want that one. The silence that fell was the loudest thing I had experienced in my entire life. It was the particular silence of a very large room full of people who have all stopped doing everything simultaneously. Mid-sentence, mid-gesture, mid-sip, mid-thought. All of it stopped. My stepmother's hand found mine under the table and gripped it with a strength I had not known she possessed. Every noble lady and her carefully dressed, carefully prepared daughter turned to look at the young woman sitting in the back corner who had somehow, with no family connections, no particular standing, no visible qualification of any kind, attracted the direct personal attention of the sixth prince. The empress's smile did not waver by a single degree. But her eyes moved very quickly through something complex. She leaned toward her son and spoke in a low, firm voice. Her hand settled on his arm with the gentle but non-negotiable pressure of a mother who has had practice redirecting this particular person. He was guided back into his seat. The empress straightened, looked out over the hall with an expression that communicated clearly that the banquet was continuing, and the conversations picked up again the way water closes over a stone. My stepmother did not release my hand for the rest of the evening. Prince Yang reached for his wine cup again with the air of someone who had done something he considered perfectly reasonable and was mildly puzzled by the reaction. She is still staring, he thought, with what I can only describe as satisfaction. I fixed my eyes on the ceiling immediately. He was the most insufferable person I had ever encountered, and I had known him for less than 10 minutes. The banquet ended as the sky outside turned the deep amber of late dusk. The noble families moved toward the palace gates in chattering groups. My stepmother had my arm and we were close, so close, almost at the gate, almost back in our carriage, almost returned to the normal life that had existed this morning. A palace maid appeared at our side as if she had grown there. Madam Lin. Her Majesty requests a private audience. Several families nearby slowed their steps just perceptibly. A few of the young women who had spent the entire banquet demonstrating accomplishment and grace cast looks at me that I felt on my skin like cold water thrown without warning. Every family in that hall had brought their finest daughter. Every family had invested months of preparation and considerable hope. And the one being kept behind was me. The young woman from the back corner who had sat against the wall eating melon seeds and laughed at the wrong moment. My stepmother's grip on my arm tightened until I could feel each finger individually. In private, the empress occupied an entirely different register. The formality and grandeur fell away, and what remained was something warmer and more human, a woman sitting comfortably in a room she had lived in for a long time. She gestured for us to sit. She poured her own tea. She asked my stepmother gentle questions about our family, our home, my studies. My stepmother answered with careful honesty, her voice steady, her hands folded in her lap. I sat beside her and concentrated on keeping my own hands still. Then the empress set her cup down and said, in the same warm and unhurried tone she had used to ask about my education, that she intended to name me as Prince Yang's secondary consort. My stepmother and I knelt and expressed our gratitude in all the correct forms. What else do you do when the empress makes a decision in your direction? You kneel. You thank her. You carry the weight of it out the door with you. The empress had someone escort us out with great courtesy. We were handed into our carriage. The palace gates closed behind us with a sound like something settling into place. We made it perhaps 3 minutes down the road before my stepmother pulled out her handkerchief and pressed it to my forehead where cold sweat had gathered, and then we both started crying at precisely the same moment, as if we had agreed on it in advance. We cried for most of the journey home. We would stop, one of us would look at the other, and it would start again. I stopped to comfort her and she stopped to comfort me, and then we would look at each other and both start again. By the time we reached our gate, both our eyes were swollen enough that our veils were working very hard to conceal the damage from the household staff. My father was sitting in the front room with a lamp burning beside him, upright and waiting. We sat down and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When we finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly, the long breath of a man accepting something that cannot be changed. What is done cannot be undone. We will manage what comes. Where is Shen? He said this last part with the very particular tone of a man who has accepted one impossible thing and now needs somewhere to direct what remains. The servants were sent out. They found my elder sister at midnight, in the hills outside the city, sitting perfectly content beside an open fire with a rabbit on a spit, completely unaware that the world had rearranged itself in her absence. She smelled of wood smoke and roasted meat, and not a single thing that had happened today had reached her yet. She was brought home under protest. Our father was not measured or patient about it. He punished her personally and thoroughly, and she argued at full volume through every single moment of it, insisting she had not known, could not have predicted, had never intended any of this, and furthermore the rabbit she had been roasting was now cold on a hillside somewhere, and that was also, in some way she had not yet fully worked out, connected to this injustice. My stepmother and I had to pull him away before the noise woke the rest of the household. He still had his official duties in the morning. After our parents had gone to bed, Shen came and sat beside me. She sat beside me on the edge of my bed, still smelling faintly of smoke, and I told her everything. The voice in my head. Prince Yang hearing my thoughts in return. The secondary consort appointment. The Empress's private room and her warm, unstoppable voice delivering the news. Shen was quiet through all of it. For her, real quiet, the kind that meant she was thinking seriously and not just waiting for her turn to talk, was unusual enough to be notable. Then she said, "Right. I will find someone who can keep that prince completely under control. If he dares to look at you the wrong way, let alone treat you badly, I will make sure he cannot walk straight for a month. I know people." She said it with absolute conviction. Then she shifted position and the movement pulled at her sore back from her father's punishment and she winced sharply, and the grandeur of the declaration faded somewhat into the reality of the situation. I sat quietly. In my experience, no one kept Prince Yang under control. He was the youngest son of the Empress, raised outside palace discipline, answerable to essentially no one. My sister's confidence was the most comforting thing in the world and also, when examined directly, had very little to stand on. I had absolutely no idea she was going to actually do it. The formal decree naming me secondary consort had still not arrived weeks later when the palace sent 2 senior court instructors to begin my etiquette training. They arrived with the young palace eunuch who had delivered their appointment notice, a man who carried himself with the particular self-importance of someone who believed his proximity to the palace made him an extension of its authority. My stepmother produced a money pouch and pressed it into his hands with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that people in certain positions needed to feel generously acknowledged or they made everything slower and more difficult. The eunuch weighed the pouch with a brief expert movement. His expression arranged itself into something gracious. "Please ensure the young lady is thoroughly and properly prepared for her future position," he said, in the tone of someone issuing an instruction that was actually just a formality since the money had already communicated everything. My stepmother saw him out with careful respect. Then she settled the 2 women, who introduced themselves as Memar Yu and Memar Fen, into the best guest rooms in the house and instructed the kitchen to prepare good meals for them at every sitting. Memar Ru and Memar Fen had been selected for their standards, which were exacting to a degree I had not previously experienced. They carried long thin wooden rulers and used them with no hesitation and no visible regret. A bow held at a slightly wrong angle produced a sharp tap across the knuckles before you had finished processing that you had made an error. A misstep in the sequence of a formal greeting ceremony produced another. A posture that softened by half an inch during a long-held position produced a look of such comprehensive disappointment that the tap almost felt more forgiving. My pain tolerance had always been embarrassingly low. One firm strike and my eyes would fill completely, silently, against every effort of my dignity to prevent it. I would blink hard and set my jaw and the tears would arrive anyway, quiet and stubborn and deeply inconvenient. My sister watched this for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Memar Fen raised her ruler for a correction and found herself briefly and efficiently airborne. She came down on the practice mat with the expression of someone whose entire understanding of the current situation had been fundamentally and permanently revised. Shen picked up the ruler from where it had landed and set it on the table with a small final sound. "A teacher who does not first examine her own methods," she said, in the pleasant voice she used when she was being most serious, "is simply a bully who has been given an official title. If my sister is not learning to the standard expected, that is where we begin the investigation." She picked up the ruler and brought it down on the practice cushion with enough force to make Memar Ru take an involuntary step backward. "From today, I will hold this." After that, I studied with a dedication and focus that surprised even me. Not because I feared what the Memars might do, because that fear had been efficiently removed from the situation, but because I could not bear to watch my sister redirect her particular style of encouragement toward anyone else in the room. The consequences were not worth it. In just under a month, I had palace etiquette memorized to a standard that visibly impressed both Memars despite their considerable professional investment in not appearing impressed. When the eunuch came to collect them, Shen walked them personally to their waiting sedan chairs. She had bought gifts with her own money, good jewelry for both women, and prepared generous red envelopes of thanks. She presented all of it with a smile of such warm and genuine sincerity that both Memars took a small involuntary step backward as she approached, the automatic movement of people whose bodies remembered something that their manners were working to override. They had arrived with quiet instructions, sent via consort Yarrow, to make things difficult for the minor official's daughter who had somehow attracted the prince's attention. Instead they had spent a month being managed with considerable skill by a 21-year-old who smiled like spring arrived early and moved like a summer storm. The sedan chair curtains closed the moment Shen stepped back. Neither Memar looked behind her. "Safe travels," my sister called pleasantly after them. More weeks passed. The imperial decree still did not come. My sister, who was constitutionally incapable of sitting still while waiting for things to happen to her, announced at dinner one evening that we should travel south to our ancestral home in Jiang Nan before my life became fully the property of the palace schedule. She made the case with 3 separate compelling arguments and then, at the precise right moment, deployed her most persuasive expression on our father. He was in the middle of a sentence about something completely unrelated. The expression landed. He lost his thread entirely and said, "That is a reasonable idea," before his brain had finished evaluating what he had just agreed to. My stepmother drew breath to speak. My father simultaneously knocked his knee sharply against the table leg and made a pained and distracted sound. My stepmother stopped to help him. The moment passed. The agreement stood. Our elder brother Zhuo was summoned from the academy to escort us. He was 25, serious in the way of people who have invested their entire identity in one pursuit, and thin in the way of people who regularly forget that eating is a task requiring attention. He maintained a personal library with more devotion and careful attention than most people gave any living relationship in their lives. Our father told him, "Your teacher says read 10,000 books. I say walking 10,000 miles teaches what books cannot reach. Go and pack your things." Zhuo packed one small bundle of personal clothes and 17 crates of books. His servant Chun, who had been with him since childhood and who loved him with the patient, uncomplaining loyalty of someone who had fully accepted their situation years ago, was allocated the outside bench next to the driver. The inside of the carriage was for the books. We left on a clear morning. My stepmother stood at the gate and pressed extra layers of clothing on me and told me to eat properly at every stop. My father stood beside her and was very straight and did not cry, which was his way of crying. The road south was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when you are not in a hurry and have no fixed arrival time to worry about. Wide flat plains gradually softened into rolling hills. Rivers ran green between banks lined with willows. The sky seemed larger than it did in the capital, as if the city walls had been containing it. Every few days, when we stopped to rest the horses and eat a proper meal by the roadside, my sister would build a small fire and produce her roast chicken. This was not a casual or simple operation. Shun approached her cooking with the same complete attention she gave to everything she considered worth doing. She had a small tin of spice blend that she guarded with the seriousness most people reserved for legal documents or valuable personal correspondence. The combination of spices was entirely her own, developed over years of careful adjustment, and she had never written it down for anyone or shared it with anyone. The preparation of the bird was precise. The fire management was careful. The timing was specific. And the result was, without any exaggeration, the best thing I had tasted in my 19 years of eating food. Warm and deep and layered in a way that started in your nose long before you took a bite and kept delivering long after you finished. Even Jouer, who treated the interior of his carriage as a private scholarly sanctuary and emerged from it only under circumstances of genuine necessity, would appear at the smell of it. He would accept a drumstick with the expression of someone doing something slightly outside his normal framework and finding it surprisingly acceptable, standing a little apart from us as if maintaining philosophical distance from the act, and then quietly accept another piece when Shun offered. It was during one of these roadside stops, 3 days south of the capital on a wide tree-lined road, that the familiar voice arrived in my head again without invitation. What is that smell? That is coming from the carriage on the left side of the road. Whatever is happening over there is the most interesting thing that has happened on this entire journey, and the journey has been extremely long. Why is that woman crouching over a fire like she is conducting something important? Wait. I set my food down and looked up carefully. Is that the chrysanthemum girl? It is. What is she doing out here? Why is she everywhere I go? Is the universe trying to tell me something because I am not interested in receiving messages from the universe right now? A carriage had slowed on the road nearby, drawn by a pair of well-matched dark horses. Through the open side panel I could see 2 men. One wore red, vivid and expensive, with the posture of someone who was fully aware at every moment of how he appeared. The other wore white so clean and simply cut that it looked like a deliberate statement of indifference to appearance, which somehow produced precisely the opposite effect. He sat with the stillness of deep water, looking at nothing in particular and seeing everything. Prince Yang. And beside him the man I had heard thinking once before. The one with the calm, unhurried thoughts. Wei Jing. Uncle Wei is going to be extremely insufferable about whatever is happening over there, Prince Yang continued internally. He dragged me out of the capital with absolutely no explanation of why and has been mysterious about it for 3 days, and now his great mysterious purpose turns out to be roadside chicken. I cannot believe this. The man is the most respected martial teacher in 3 provinces, and his profound reason for leaving the capital is someone else's roast chicken. Before Prince Yang could finish forming whatever plan he was constructing, Wei Jing stepped out of the carriage. He crossed the road in measured, unhurried strides, stopped in front of my sister, looked at the chicken she had just finished over the fire, looked at her, and gave a small, correct, entirely composed bow. "My thanks," he said simply. And then he took the chicken. I knew what was coming. 21 years of watching my sister respond to things being taken from her without permission. I braced for the particular kind of quiet that comes just before Shun made something very clear to someone. She smiled. Not the warning smile. Not the polite managing smile. A softer one. The kind that appeared so rarely that the first time you saw it, it took a moment to recognize what it was. "If the chicken pleases the young master," she said, "then the chicken has fulfilled its highest purpose." My brother's drumstick fell out of his hand and hit the ground. We looked at each other. Then at Shun. Then at each other again. "Interesting," said a voice in my head that was not Prince Yang's. Calmer, quieter, warmer in a different register entirely, like warmth that comes from something that runs deep rather than burns quickly. So this is what Uncle Master wanted me to find. I thought it would be something martial. Something about discipline or technique. I did not expect this. I did not expect her at all. Wei Jing. Thinking things he clearly did not intend anyone to receive. I filed this information away with great care. Prince Yang had climbed halfway out of his carriage with the expression of someone who was not prepared to be ignored while other people received roast chicken and attention. Little chrysanthemum, his thoughts arrived with the deliberateness of someone who had decided we were past the pretense of not communicating. I know you can hear me. Stop performing as if you cannot. And tell your sister to make more. I can smell it from here and I have not eaten properly since this morning. I turned slightly away from his carriage and thought very carefully and specifically about how good the chicken was, how the skin had gone perfectly golden, how the spices had soaked all the way through, how I was going to eat every remaining piece and enjoy every single bite. You little. We should continue, Wei Jing said, appearing at the carriage door at the exact useful moment, chicken still in hand, his expression communicating with absolute economy that the matter of the chicken was settled and all related discussions were concluded. Prince Yang looked at me with the specific frustration of someone who has been outmaneuvered by a situation he did not fully understand yet. I looked at the tree line. His carriage moved on down the road. Next time, his thoughts arrived fainter with distance but still clear, make extra. That is not a request. My sister watched the carriages disappear around the bend in the road. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket, produced her small spice tin, and turned it once in her hands with the expression she wore when running calculations she had not shared with anyone yet. That, she said with deep satisfaction, was chicken number 17. 13 more to go. She said it like it meant something specific and complete. I did not understand the arithmetic yet. But I had learned over 19 years of being her sister that her arithmetic was almost always correct. Our brother climbed back into our carriage after that, muttering about the impropriety of young women interacting with strange men on public roads and how some people in this family were constitutionally allergic to decorum. Shun reached past me, picked up the fire starter from the supply bag, and held it up where Zhuo could see it clearly. He stopped talking mid-sentence, looked at the fire starter, looked at his carriage full of books, and climbed back into his own carriage without another word. Everyone has a pressure point, my sister said, patting my head. Learn to find them early. It saves a great deal of time. Jiang Nan arrived the way beautiful places always seem to arrive, gradually and then all at once, like the landscape had been building toward something and finally delivered it. The flat northern plains gave way to greener, softer hills. Waterways multiplied until water was everywhere, threading between white-walled houses with dark tile roofs that stood in rows along canal banks and looked at their own reflections in the slow green water below. Flower sellers on painted boats called across the water to passers-by from under strings of paper lanterns. The air was different here, softer, like the South had made a decision to be gentle with everyone who arrived. My sister grabbed my hand the moment we stepped off the boat and pulled me forward into it all. Now this, she said, looking around with the expression of someone arriving somewhere they had been waiting to return to, is what a place should feel like. She then proceeded to buy things at essentially every stall and cellar we passed for the next 3 days. Carved wooden combs and embroidered sachets filled with dried flowers. Small painted ceramic figures and fine paper fans with poems brushed along the folds. A set of polished bronze mirrors in a fitted wooden case. Woven bracelets and tiny stoppered bottles of southern fragrance oil. A painted cloth puppet that she did not explain. She bargained with cheerful energy and tipped generously enough that sellers remembered her face when she passed the next day. The boatman she had hired watched all of this with his mouth open for most of the first afternoon. Young ladies from the north really are something else, he said to Zhuo at one point, apparently seeking shared understanding. Zhuo was attempting to read in the bow of the boat. He looked up briefly, looked at Shun haggling over a pair of embroidered slippers with a woman on a dock, and returned to his book without comment. He had learned to spend his energy only on arguments he had some chance of winning. By the end of the 3rd day, Shun stood on the dock as the lights came on across the water town and looked back at it with the expression of someone saying a reluctant goodbye to something they genuinely loved. If time were less unkind, she said, I would spend a full week here. At minimum. Then she turned around, found the boatman, and hired him for 2 additional days. He bit the silver she pressed into his palm, confirmed it was real, and grinned so widely his eyes nearly disappeared. We returned to the dock each evening with our arms unburdened while Zhuo and the boatman followed behind carrying everything, their arms stacked with boxes and wrapped bundles. My brother's hands, which had spent their entire existence handling books and writing brushes, were red and sore by the second evening. He did not complain. I think he had assessed the situation and concluded that complaining would produce an outcome worse than sore hands. That night we settled into several good upper rooms at the best inn near the dock. Zhuo had his book crates carried upstairs immediately upon arrival and spent considerable time arranging them along the walls of his room with the care of someone installing irreplaceable objects. He checked each crate himself. Then he had Chun check them. He confirmed the locks on the door. Then he lay down with the peaceful satisfaction of a man whose valuables are accounted for and secure. I woke in the deep of the night to the sound of something heavy falling in the room directly beside mine. Shun was already sitting up, hand closed around the handle of the short whip she kept rolled beside her pillow on every journey. She was off the bed and at the door before I had finished processing what had woken me. I grabbed my outer robe and followed because leaving my sister to handle things alone in the dark had never once felt like a reasonable option in my life. She did not knock. 2 men were inside Shua's room. One had knocked over a crate of books in the dark and was standing over the scattered volumes with the expression of someone who had just discovered that what they were stealing was not what they had hoped. The other was halfway through the window with a bundle under his arm. Shun assessed this in the time it took me to blink, and then the room became very briefly very loud and very efficient. When the noise stopped, both men were on the floor in states of varying discomfort, looking like people who had made a significant error in the planning stage of their evening. Other guests had woken. Candlelight appeared under several doors along the corridor. I stepped quickly to Shun's side and pulled her outer robe over her shoulders before any doors opened, because a young woman dealing with intruders at midnight with her hair down was a story that could travel in directions we did not need. If I had known it was just books, one of the men said from the floor with genuine and specific grievance, I would not have gotten out of bed. The innkeeper appeared with a lantern, rope, and the brisk competence of someone who had managed similar situations before. As he worked, one of the men mentioned helpfully that the young master in this room had been given something mild in his tea earlier and would sleep soundly until morning. Shun looked through the open doorway at our brother, who was lying on his bed in the posture of someone who had absolutely no awareness of anything that had happened or was currently happening. She looked at him for a quiet moment. He needs the world to teach him what books cannot, she said, not unkindly. He has been overdue for this lesson. Then, with the efficiency of someone executing a plan she had already formed, she had Chun carry every single one of Zhuo's book crates quietly down to the locked carriage in the courtyard while our brother slept on undisturbed. Chun understood from tone and context that this was an instruction to be followed without questions. The next morning I was woken by the sound of thorough and escalating distress from the room next door. Drawers opening and closing. The wardrobe door. Then a quality of silence that was worse than the noise. We came down to breakfast to find Zhuo standing in the doorway of the inn with the specific expression of a person standing at the edge of an irreversible loss. He had checked every corner. He had looked everywhere twice. My books, he said, in a voice stripped of its usual composure. All of them. Every crate. They are gone. I opened my mouth. My sister was faster. Books, she said pleasantly, settling into her chair and reaching for the tea, are ink and paper. The thoughts are the valuable part, and those live in your head and cannot be stolen. She looked at him over her cup. Sit down. The eggs this morning are very good. Chun appeared at the bottom of the stairs at that moment, caught his young master's expression, and immediately went to explain everything quietly. The shift in Zhuo's face as he understood was visible from across the room. He came to the table, sat down, accepted the eggs, and ate in silence. He said nothing to Shun. He was, as always, too wise to pick that battle. But he spent the entire day's travel in our carriage instead of his own, sitting by the open window, watching the countryside pass without a book in his hands, looking at the hills and water and sky with the attentiveness of someone who had been told to look and was finally, genuinely doing it. After the boat days and the inn and the long unhurried road, we finally arrived at Lin village, where our father's family had farmed and studied and raised children for 4 generations. The village sat against a green hillside with vegetable terraces climbing all the way up to where the trees began. Old clay tile roofs and whitewashed walls and smoke rising from kitchen chimneys in the late afternoon. The clan elder received us in the ancestral hall with correct formality. Zhuo was taken inside for the ritual ceremony while Shun and I were immediately surrounded by a warm and comprehensive group of the older women of the clan, who fed us from plates that kept being refilled and asked careful interested questions and pressed our cheeks and hands with the particular warmth of people who have heard about you for years and are very glad to find that you are real and here. When Zhuo came out of the ancestral hall at sunset, his eyes were red in a way he was not attempting to hide. He stood outside the hall for a moment before he could speak clearly. "There are children here," he said quietly and with difficulty, "who have never had a proper teacher. I grew up thinking that was just how things were everywhere. That everyone had what we had. I did not understand." He went into town the next morning before breakfast. He came back in the afternoon looking tired in the way of someone who has spent energy on something worthwhile. He had found a scholar willing to relocate to the village to teach. He had persuaded him by offering 3 of his rarest personal texts as immediate payment and a formal monthly teaching stipend, paid in advance, of 300 taels of silver. 300 taels was the entirety of Zhuo's personal savings accumulated over 2 years of careful, consistent management of his academy allowance. He had never spent it freely. He had been saving it toward a specific rare text he had been seeking for years. He handed it over to the clan elder in front of the assembled family, in a single transaction, with no ceremony and no hesitation. The carriage that had arrived packed with 17 crates of books departed the village with 2. Everything else was carried into the clan library by Zhuo himself, crate by crate. The clan women, who had watched all of this, held a quiet rapid conversation among themselves and then reappeared with baskets of smoked meats and jars of preserved fruit and bundles of woven cloth and bags of dried mushrooms, which they loaded into the carriage until it was full and Chun was once again on the outside bench. Zhuo sat by the open window for the entire journey north and did not open either of the 2 remaining books once. He looked at the road ahead with the expression of someone who has had something rearranged inside them and is still taking the measure of it. We never made it back to the capital. Halfway home, on a long road that cut through a pine forest fragrant with recent rain, our carriages rolled to a stop. Men in grey and blue appeared from both sides of the road without hurry, as if they had been waiting there for some time and expected us specifically. Something drifted into the carriage, sweet and faint, too subtle to identify before it began working. My thoughts went soft at the edges. I reached for something to hold onto and found nothing, and then the trees outside tilted sideways and everything went quiet. When I woke, I was in a clean, plainly furnished room on a mountain I did not recognize. Wooden ceiling. Simple furniture. Through the paper window, pine trees ran in long rows down a slope that disappeared into mist below. Somewhere far beneath, water moved over rocks in a sound like low continuous conversation. I was specifically, clearly, and repeatedly told that this journey would be straightforward. I outlined my objections to mysterious excursions. I was not listened to. Again. I am beginning to see a pattern in my life, and the pattern is that my objections are never listened to. Prince Yang. His thoughts arrived before I had finished opening my eyes, which confirmed both that he was somewhere nearby and that he was in the middle of an argument with himself about the situation. I sat up. Shun was already awake on the other side of the bed, sitting with the composed stillness of someone who had been awake for a while and had already done a full survey of the room and formed her assessment. She looked at me. "I know," she said, before I spoke. "Wei Jing is here. His master brought us here." She smoothed her sleeve with a small deliberate gesture. "The mountain elder." A pause. Something moved across her face that she did not entirely conceal. "I think this is where we were always going to end up." A young attendant led us out through corridors smelling of pine resin and old wood into a main hall with high ceilings and afternoon light coming through paper screens. The mountain elder sat in the central seat with the presence of someone whose stillness had been built over decades and could not be manufactured quickly. He was old the way certain mountains are old, without fragility, simply with the settled weight of something that has stood for a very long time and expects to continue. He looked at us with eyes that were remarkably, unexpectedly clear. Not bad, he said softly. A slow, satisfied nod. This is as it should be. Wei Jing, who had been standing to one side with the composed quiet of someone who had been here before and knew how it worked, knelt before the elder with complete and genuine deference. Please grant permission, master. Our brother Zhuo had walked directly into the mountain library upon arrival, drawn by an instinct so strong it overrode everything else, and would not emerge for 2 full days. My sister was taken aside by Wei Jing and led to a smaller side room. I was left in the hall with the mountain elder, sitting across from him with my hands folded in my lap, trying to look like someone who was comfortable with the situation. The elder looked at me occasionally with gentle and faintly amused patience, the way someone looks at a person who is trying very hard to appear larger than they feel. He drank his tea. He stroked his beard. He was in absolutely no hurry about anything. You are a very lucky young woman, he said eventually. Someone must keep him anchored to the ground. It is not a small task and it is not given to those who cannot carry it. I sat with this and tried to determine whether I was the kind of person who could carry it. Something about sitting in that room, in that quiet, with the sound of water far below and the pine trees standing in their long rows outside, settled something in me that had been unsettled since the evening of the banquet. When Shun came out of the side room, her cheeks were the deep warm color of New Year lanterns. She crossed the hall directly to me and took both my hands in hers without preamble. It is done, she said. Her voice was completely steady. Her eyes were doing something she could not fully control. Wei Jing is going to propose properly when we return to the capital. They have already agreed on the season for the wedding. I looked at her carefully. She was blinking more than necessary. Jie, I said. Do not. You like him. Whether I like him is entirely beside the. You like him very much. Lin Mei. You told me twice in the past year that romantic feelings directed at you personally made you want to relocate to a different city. You chased the Yarrow family's nephew down 3 full streets for confessing his feelings to you in front of witnesses. He announced it very loudly in public and I found the public nature of it deeply embarrassing. Anne. You like Wei Jing very much and you have since the chicken. She squeezed my hands hard enough to be slightly painful, looked at the ceiling, and was quiet for a long moment. He understands the chicken, she said finally, in a voice that was trying to be dismissive and not managing it at all. Not just that it tastes good. He understands what it takes to make it taste the way it does. He noticed things about it that required real thought to notice. She paused. That is not nothing. It is very much not nothing, I agreed. She looked back at me and the real smile appeared. The one she saved for very few people. We stayed 2 days on the mountain. When Zhuo finally surfaced from the library on the second afternoon, blinking at the outdoor light with the dazed contentment of someone returning from a long and deeply satisfying journey, and was informed that his sister had, during his absence, arranged her entire future life, he stood completely still for 8 full seconds. You, he said. You are when did this how you. Wei Jing resolved the situation with quiet and precise efficiency by producing a written list of the rarest texts currently housed in the mountain library and indicating that a generous selection of them would be gifted to Zhuo as part of the engagement proceedings. Zhuo stopped mid-sentence. He looked at the list once, then again. His eyes filled with tears that had nothing whatsoever to do with his sister's engagement and everything to do with 3 titles he had been seeking for years. He and Wei Jing shook hands with the profound mutual gravity of men who had reached a satisfactory agreement on something they both considered genuinely important. My sister watched this with the expression of someone discovering that her future husband is considerably more capable than even her generous initial estimate. A few days after we returned to the capital, word moved through the noble families that Wei Jing, the younger brother of the Marquis of Qinzhen, the Empress's own younger brother, who had been traveling and studying outside the capital for many years, had returned home. The following morning, before the household had fully finished breakfast, a formal delegation arrived at our gate to propose marriage on Wei Jing's behalf to our eldest daughter. My father set his tea down. My stepmother made a sound that did not become a word. They looked at each other. Then they both turned and looked at Shun, who was sitting at the table eating a pear with the complete composure of someone who had known this was coming and had made her peace with it at some point on a mountain. The Empress's brother, my stepmother said, with the careful tone of someone verifying information they are not yet ready to fully believe. Yes, said Shen. He wants to marry you. That is what the delegation is here about, yes. Shen. My sister set down her pear. She looked at our stepmother with the expression she reserved for moments of genuine feeling, the one without any performance in it at all. Mother, she said. The chicken worked. Nobody in the room understood this except me. I understood it completely. Wei Yijing became a regular and welcome presence at our house after the formal engagement was settled. He brought thoughtful gifts without ostentation. He had long conversations with my father about historical governance and ancient texts that my father genuinely and visibly enjoyed. He treated my stepmother with the attentive respect of someone who recognized what she had built in this household and considered it worth acknowledging. He and Zhuo developed a serious, comfortable friendship grounded in shared investment in rare books, conducted primarily in companionable quiet. He always brought Prince Yang when he visited. Prince Yang arrived each time with the suppressed energy of someone making a genuine effort to behave and finding it challenging. He accepted tea. He did not knock anything over. He sat with approximate stillness. He behaved, mostly, because Wei Yijing's presence in the room produced in him the involuntary cooperation of someone whose body remembered certain lessons from a younger and more turbulent time. Except when he could not resist. The little secondary consort is behind that door frame again, he thought one afternoon with unmistakable satisfaction. She has been there for at least 8 minutes. Does she genuinely believe I cannot see her sleeve from here? I took 3 steps back from the door frame. Now she is walking past with great purpose as if she had a destination in mind the whole time. I walked past with what I sincerely hoped was a convincing expression of someone going somewhere specific. Terrible instincts for evasion, he thought. It is almost endearing. I went to find my stepmother and stayed there until he left. My sister and Wei Yijing were married in the spring, just before my coming-of-age ceremony. The wedding was quiet in planning and magnificent in execution. The bridal procession wound through 4 streets and the drums carried across the whole district. Red lanterns hung from every gate along the route. The guests were numerous and the banquet ran until late. 3 days after the wedding, Shun and Wei Yijing traveled up the mountain to pay their respects to the elder. They returned with him. He rested one night in the capital. Then he went to the palace to speak privately with the emperor and the empress. No one was told what was discussed in those meetings. But the palace's chief eunuch, a man not known for demonstrating warmth or enthusiasm about anything, was seen personally escorting the elder back out through the main gates with a deep and genuine bow, and word of this small unusual thing circulated through the capital's informed circles for several weeks afterward. My sister came home the evening before my coming-of-age ceremony. She knocked on my door and came in and climbed into my bed without waiting for an answer, the way she had done since I was a young girl and she had decided I was a sister worth having. Her husband stood in the doorway with the expression of a man who had married into a situation he understood intellectually but still found surprising in practice. Out, she told him pleasantly, without looking up. He went. She held me and talked in the dark the way she had always talked, following her thoughts wherever they went without needing the conversation to stay in one place. She talked about the fish in the Jiang Nan canals. She talked about the dent that had appeared in her spice tin and whether it needed replacing or whether a dented tin had character. She talked about a conversation she had overheard at her wedding between 2 distant relatives that was extremely funny and that she had been saving to share with me specifically. I drifted and came back and drifted again, held by the familiar warmth of her voice. Outside, the night was quiet. The house had settled into its sleeping sounds. I thought about the beginning of things. When I was very young, before I had the words for what I was observing, things had been different in this household. I was my father's daughter by a concubine who had not survived my birth, raised under my stepmother's name as a kindness but without the full warmth of her heart. Shun had looked at me in those early years with the cool assessing look of someone who had not yet made up her mind about something unexpected in her world. Then when I was 5 years old the carriage had overturned on the road to the academy. My father and stepmother and Shun had all been inside. They came home with cuts and bruises and something that had shifted in all 3 of them in some way I could feel but not describe. My stepmother came to me that evening and said, with a directness that left no room for softening, "Poor child. You are nothing but bones. That will not do at all." And Shun had stood in the doorway studying me with the serious attention she gave to things she was deciding about, and then said with complete authority, "I like this one. I am going to raise her properly." Everyone assumed I was too young to remember clearly. I remembered everything. The light in the room. The particular quality of Shun's voice when she said she liked me, as if she were making a decision that would hold. My stepmother's hand on my face, the first time it had been warm. I had never said so to anyone. Some knowledge belongs to you and is worth more kept than shared. The knowledge that I was loved because someone chose it, that the warmth around me was decided and not automatic, that it cost something and was given anyway, every day, consistently, without being asked. That was mine to keep. My sister said into the dark. You are going to be more than fine in that household. I am a little scared, I said honestly. I know. Her arms tightened slightly. You have been scared before and you have been fine before. The pattern holds. Prince Yang makes a great deal of noise in the wrong direction. Underneath all of that, he is actually decent. He shows up. He keeps his word when he gives it. These are not small things. Another pause. And he is absolutely, completely terrified of my husband, so there is also that. How terrified? I asked. Profoundly, she said with deep and evident satisfaction. Deeply and profoundly. The coming-of-age ceremony was attended by family and my father's official connections. My stepmother wept quietly through the formal portions and made no effort to stop herself. My father stood at attention and did not cry, which was always how he cried. Zhou stood beside him with the straight-backed pride of an elder brother who has decided his feelings on the matter and committed to them fully. When the ceremony concluded, a palace eunuch arrived carrying a scroll and announced in the clear carrying voice of someone trained to deliver exactly this kind of news, that His Majesty the Emperor had decreed that Lin Mei was to be named the official wife of His Highness the Sixth Prince. Not secondary consort. Not a lesser appointment quietly arranged to satisfy an impulse expressed at a banquet. Official wife. The room went very still. I stood in the middle of the stillness and felt it settle around me. Then my sister's hand closed around my arm and pulled me upright with the confident grip of someone who has already decided how this moment goes. My, she said. This is exactly where you are meant to be. I did not fully believe it. I had never been the kind of person that stories chose as their center. Too quiet, too careful, too accustomed to the edges of things. Official wife of an imperial prince was not a role that had ever arranged itself in my imagination around my own face. But my sister's eyes held no doubt whatsoever. And my stepmother was pressing her handkerchief to her mouth and the tears running down her face looked like joy. And my father put his hand on the top of my head for one slow deliberate moment, with the careful gentleness of a person for whom this kind of touch does not come easily and who is giving it anyway, and the weight of that brief touch said everything he did not have words to say. Everyone crowded forward with congratulations. Neighbors who had always been polite but not particularly attentive became suddenly very warm and very interested. Distant relatives appeared with expressions of deep personal investment in our family's good fortune. Two young women placed impossibly above the family's station by the kind of fortune that people build entire religious observance practices hoping to attract. Which temple did this family worship at? A voice said in the corridor outside, not quite quietly enough. My stepmother heard it and laughed until she had to sit down. That night I lay awake for a long time after the house went quiet. I thought about the palace and the empress and Prince Yang and all of his thoughts that I could never stop hearing, and what my life was going to look like and whether I was the person it required. A voice arrived in my head in the quiet way it sometimes came, less aggressive than usual, almost careful. She looks peaceful when she is not glaring at me. I opened my eyes. Prince Yang was visible through the window, which was on the second floor. He was positioned on the outer ledge in a way that suggested he had come via the roof and saw nothing unusual about this approach. I sat up and threw my pillow with full conviction. It hit the window frame. He had already moved back. Your aim is genuinely very poor, he thought, and there was something in the quality of it that was almost affectionate, which annoyed me considerably more than the insult would have. You are crouching on the roof outside my window in the middle of the night. I was not on the roof. I was walking past. The window is on the second floor. I was taking the elevated route. That is not a thing. A pause with something considering in it. I am leaving now. And then, very carefully, I heard the window being drawn closed from the outside with a quietness that suggested genuine effort. In the morning I told my stepmother with great specificity that the household guards were not earning their wages. She laughed until the tea she was holding tilted at a dangerous angle. He sat in the front courtyard all night, she told me, wiping her eyes. The whole night, my. He did not leave until the morning kitchen fires were being lit. The decree has been issued. Stop hiding from him. I pulled my blanket over my face. She started laughing again. A prince's wedding is not arranged by the people getting married. It is arranged by palace officials who have specific long-established responsibilities for specific ceremonial sequences and who take these responsibilities with the comprehensive seriousness of people who believe that the correct execution of ritual is one of the things that holds the world in order. There are approved hours, colors, sequences for every stage, written down, revised over generations, non-negotiable. Prince Yang came to escort me himself. He arrived in full wedding robes he had apparently put on without waiting for the palace dressers, because two of the fastenings at his collar were slightly misaligned in a way that would have made any palace dresser briefly despair. He stood in our front hall looking simultaneously magnificent and faintly self-conscious in the specific way that only very proud people look when they have done something earnest and are fully aware of it. My stepmother pressed her handkerchief to her eyes when she saw him. My father shook his hand with great seriousness. Zhou carried me to the wedding sedan on his back, in the old tradition, with the careful steadiness of someone who has decided that if this is the task assigned to him he will do it with full attention. Before he set me down, with his face turned away so I could not see his expression, he said quietly, "If anyone in that household is unkind to you, send word to me immediately. I will come." My gentle, bookish, physically unimposing brother said this with a certainty so complete and unqualified that my throat went tight and I had to breathe carefully for a moment. "I know," I told him. "I know you will." The wedding proceeded through all its correct, beautiful, precisely sequenced stages. The 3 bows. The shared cup. The procession through lit corridors to the bridal chamber, accompanied by the formal good wishes of people I had just met and would be learning for the foreseeable future. The bridal chamber had been prepared with the thoroughness of palace staff who considered their work a reflection of institutional pride. Everything was red and gold and warm lamplight. Noble women were present for the final formal stage, filling the room with the auspicious words appropriate to the occasion. When they left, my sister was the last one still there. She sat beside me with the specific expression of someone about to deliver information they consider genuinely important. "Jejia," I said carefully. "This is necessary knowledge," she said, with the tone she used for things she had decided were non-negotiable. She reached into her sleeve and produced a small carefully wrapped illustrated book and placed it in my lap. "Study this with an open mind. I will leave you to it." She stood up and walked to the door, then stopped with her hand on the frame. My, she said, in a different and quieter voice entirely. "You are going to be wonderful." She left and closed the door. The book was extremely comprehensive in its subject matter. Prince Yang arrived not long after, supported under the arm by an attendant who was performing the careful work of someone managing a person who insists they need no managing. He was muttering with considerable conviction that he was completely fine, the wine had been very weak, he had consumed significantly more under significantly more demanding conditions. This was frankly an insult to his capacity, and everyone would be hearing about this. His thoughts were considerably more honest. Completely in control. Fully functional. The wine was nothing whatsoever. Uncle Wei thinks he is very clever and he is not nearly as clever as he thinks he is. I have been looking forward to this evening for a considerable amount of time and one meddling uncle with access to the wine supply is not going to. His eyes landed on the illustrated book still open in my lap before I had finished processing that I was still holding it. His thoughts stopped completely. Then, "Oh, little wife," he said, with carefully maintained composure, "you are considerably bolder than you look." "I like this very much," he thought privately. Then he caught me receiving it and thought something that made my ears go warm. "We are going to work through that entire book," he announced, with great conviction. "Tonight." He settled onto the bed, reached for the ceremonial wine left for the evening toast, drank it with the determined expression of a man proving a point, and was then unconscious before the cup was fully set down. Wei Yijing had been thorough and patient and had planned ahead considerably. I looked at Prince Yang, now draped across the wedding bed in full ceremonial robes, sleeping with the complete and absolute peace of someone who had no awareness of anything and was not going to develop any awareness for several hours. I looked at the illustrated book. I looked at the lamp burning low in its holder. Then I lay down on my side of the bed, pulled the wedding quilt up, and went to sleep. The next morning we attended the palace to pay formal respects to the empress with full energy and color, giving every external appearance of a couple who had spent their wedding night entirely as expected. The empress received us warmly. Then later she pulled her head attendant aside and asked very quietly whether her youngest son might have some constitutional weakness she had not previously been made aware of. That afternoon Prince Yang went to find his uncle. He came back with a bruised shoulder, one sleeve slightly torn, and a new policy he announced with great solemnity. "Nothing that man has touched," he said. "No wine, no tea, no water, no food. Nothing. I am serious." He maintained this for exactly 5 days before Wei Yijing produced an exceptional vintage at a family dinner, and Prince Yang, drawn in by the smell of it before his resolution had a chance to engage, forgot everything he had decided. He came home that evening thinking very loudly about how Uncle Wei had done it again and how he had specifically said he would not fall for it, and here he was having fallen for it, and there was apparently no flaw to how many times this could happen. I did not mention that I had heard all of it. Some information you hold for yourself. Marriage was not what I had expected. In most of the ways that mattered, it was better. Prince Yang was not careful or diplomatic. He said what he thought without the social management most people applied before speaking. He was direct in ways that took getting used to, and occasionally said things that required some quiet recovery time on my end. But he was also, in the ways that proved themselves over weeks and then months, reliable in a way I had not anticipated. He was present. He kept his word when he gave it. He noticed small things and acted on them quietly, practically, without ceremony. Because we communicated primarily in the silent way that had begun the night of the banquet, people observing us from outside often read distance into our marriage. They would see us sitting in the same room without speaking and conclude there was difficulty between us. Then they would watch us leave together and find the quality of it told a different story entirely, and they would have to revise their conclusions. One afternoon a nosy household official made a pointed comment about what a quiet couple we seemed to be, with the smile of someone hoping to start something interesting. Prince Yang looked at the man for a moment. Then he took my hand, said he had just remembered somewhere else we needed to be, and walked us out of the room. In the corridor he thought at me with considerable energy exactly what he thought of people who commented on other people's marriages. I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. The empress, I noticed over time, never raised the subject of concubines or additional wives. This was unusual enough for a household in our position that I thought about it, and eventually I asked. Prince Yang was evasive when sober. One evening when he had been drinking at a particularly long official dinner and his guard was lower than usual, I asked again, and the full story came out in pieces. The mountain elder had told the empress, years before the banquet, that her youngest son's fate was bound to one specific person and could not be routed around. This was not poetry or romantic theory. It was the elder's assessment, and the elder was not given to assessments that proved incorrect. If I died young, Prince Yang would follow within a month. Some bonds did not permit alternatives, and attempting to install alternatives produced only damage. The empress had made her calculations. She had stopped pushing. I asked Prince Yang when he had started carrying anything for me beyond the initial novelty of a shared ability. He thought about it for longer than I expected. At the banquet, he said finally. Everyone in that room had prepared in advance who they were going to be for that occasion and was performing it with great effort. And then you laughed because something was actually funny, because you could not stop it, and you did not plan it and you did not mean to, and it was completely real. He was quiet for a moment. I had not seen something real in a long time. I did not realize how much I had missed it. You called me a chrysanthemum, I said. You have a very distinctive smile. Chrysanthemums are funeral flowers. They are also in the classical texts associated with resilience and late blooming character, and I hit him with the nearest available cushion. He caught it one-handed, grinning, and in the lamplight he looked younger and less armored than he allowed himself to look in front of anyone else. More like the man who had grown up on a mountain being chased by his uncle for poor decisions, and less like the sixth prince who could silence a banquet hall with 4 words. Chrysanthemum, he thought, with evident enjoyment. I reached for a second cushion. 3 months into our marriage, Prince Yang and I went up the mountain together to pay our respects to the elder. It was a clear autumn day, the pine trees sharp and fragrant on either side of the path, everything clean and particular after recent rain. The elder was in his customary place in the main hall, settled into the central seat with the unhurried satisfaction of someone who is exactly where they have always been and expects to continue. Curled in the folds of his outer robe, between his elbow and his knee, was a small white dog. It had very large, very calm, very self-possessed eyes and looked up at us with the manner of something that had been here for a long time and found its situation entirely acceptable. Prince Yang went completely still. I had seen him still before, but not quite like this. This was the stillness of someone who had been presented with an answer to a question they had been carrying for a long time. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, with great care, "Master. Is that Huan Huan?" The elder smiled the small satisfied smile of someone who has been waiting to answer this question and has been looking forward to the moment. He stroked the dog's white fur gently. "She has always preferred this form," he said simply. The small white dog looked at Prince Yang with her large calm eyes. She held his gaze with the complete and ancient tranquility of something that has existed in several forms and found all of them equally fine. Then she yawned, showing small neat teeth, and resettled herself in the elder's robe. I turned to look at Prince Yang. "Huan Huan," I said. "The one you said was more beautiful than every woman at the banquet." I was younger then and my assessments were less developed. "You said the Prime Minister's daughter was not half as good-looking as Huan Huan." I was speaking loosely. "You said not one single woman in the entire hall came close to Huan Huan." Context is important and the context has shifted considerably. Prince Yang. She is a dog. She is clearly a very distinguished. You lost to a dog. He looked at Huan Huan. She looked back at him with the serene, entirely unbothered equanimity of something that has been many things and is not troubled by any of them. "Master," Prince Yang said, in the tone of a man accepting a loss with whatever dignity he could currently locate, "I would very much appreciate some tea." I laughed until I had to sit down on the hall steps, right there on the mountain, with the pine trees standing in their long rows down the slope and water moving over stones somewhere far below and the elder watching both of us with the settled contented patience of someone who arranged all of this a very long time ago and is glad, today, to see it has held together. That is how I became the sixth prince's official wife. Because I laughed at the wrong moment, in the wrong place, within hearing of the wrong person. Because I looked up when I should have kept my head down. Because I looked him in the eye when I should have looked at the floor. My sister will tell you she planned every element from the first chicken to the mountain to the precise angle at which she extended the spice tin that first time on the road. She is probably more right about this than I give her credit for. My brother will tell you it was written into the arrangement of things and that the right reading of the right texts would have predicted every step. He is also not entirely wrong. The mountain elder says only that karmic bonds do not ask permission before they arrive, and that this is the correct way of things. And Prince Yang, if you ask him directly when he decided that the quiet, unremarkable young woman from the back corner of the banquet hall was going to rearrange his entire life whether he approved or not, looks at you with his sharp and assessing eyes and thinks something he will not say out loud. But I hear it anyway. That was always how it worked between us. Elder sister's story, in her own voice. My parents and I were on the highway when the truck came from the left without any warning at all. When I opened my eyes I was wearing heavy unfamiliar fabric robes stiff at the collar, and the ground beneath me was hard-packed dirt rather than the interior of a vehicle. My mother was sitting up nearby pulling at her sleeves with the careful focus of a person whose brain has been presented with multiple contradictory pieces of information and is working to reconcile them. My father was on his knees pressing his palms flat against the ground with the methodical attention of an engineer who has encountered something that requires measurement before response. I looked down at my hands. They were small. Not the hands of a 23-year-old. Small in the way of a child who has not yet grown into them, soft-palmed and short-fingered. I held them up and looked at them for a long moment and confirmed that yes, these were the hands of someone perhaps 5 or 6 years old, which was deeply inconvenient. Well, my mother said, with the specific steadiness of a woman who had managed genuine emergencies in her professional life and had not lost the habit, this is certainly new. We are inside a book, my father said, with the particular faraway expression of someone receiving information from a direction they cannot quite locate. I have the original owner's memories. Not all of them, not clearly, but enough. I know this household and I know this period. He paused. We are in a novel. I am nearly certain. I thought about it. Ancient setting. Noble household. A girl at the gate who had been mistreated. An empress. A sixth prince. Which novel? I said. He gave me enough detail that I had it within 2 sentences. I had read it twice during slow periods at my old job, stretched out with my feet on my desk, skimming through palace politics and romantic disasters toward the ending the author had arranged for the main characters. The secondary daughter, I said slowly. She eventually becomes the prince's official wife. And then something arrived from the first reading that I had skimmed past lightly. There is a 6th prince. The empress's youngest. He dies young in the original story. Why? My mother said. Because the girl who is fated to him dies first. Some kind of bound destiny. If she goes first, he follows. And she dies because she is not protected as a child. She grows up alone and frightened and does not survive long enough to reach the part of the story where things get better for her. The 3 of us were quiet with this for a moment. Then a sound reached us from near the gate. Small and tentative, the sound of someone who had learned to attract attention carefully. A little girl stood in the shadow of the gatehouse. Thin in the way of a child who has been consistently underfed. Clean clothes not carefully chosen. Watching us with very large, very careful eyes, the eyes of someone who had learned early to observe a situation thoroughly before deciding whether to approach. My mother was moving before I finished processing what I was seeing. She crossed the distance, crouched to be level with the child, said something I could not hear from where I was standing. I watched the child's face do something complicated, try to close itself back to blankness, and not quite manage it. This is the second young lady, a servant said behind me with a cautious bow. Born to the late concubine. She is under Madam's care. Under Madam's care. Which in the original version of this story meant essentially nothing practical. A formal designation providing no actual protection. Surviving on the edge of someone else's household. Waiting for things to get better while they quietly got worse. I looked at her for a long time. She was not remarkable looking in any way that made people stop. Just a small, thin child with careful eyes and the particular stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was safer than movement. But something about the quality of her attention, the precise steady way she was taking everything in, made me think there was considerably more happening in there than the surface suggested. I like this one, I said, with more certainty than I had planned and was not sorry about it. I am going to raise her correctly. Whatever was going to happen to her in the original story, that version is over. My mother looked at me over the child's head with the expression she reserved for moments when she was proud of something and choosing not to make a ceremony of it. Raising Mai turned out to be one of the more straightforward decisions of my second life. She was not difficult to love. Observant, thoughtful, careful in the way that people are careful when they have had to be, and she listened with the quality that made the person being listened to feel that what they were saying was worth hearing. She remembered more than people gave her credit for, from earlier than anyone assumed. I suspected this from the second month and was certain by the end of the first year, but she never said so and I never pushed, because some things are worth more unspoken. My first priority was simple. Feed her. Get her enough sleep. Ensure her comfort was a household matter and not an optional consideration. Make sure she knew she was accounted for. Within a year the frightened smallness had softened into something more like her actual face. My second project was more involved. The 6th prince's destiny was bound to Mai's in a way that the plot could not navigate around, only prepare for. He needed to meet her. She needed to be in a position to meet him and survive the meeting and everything that followed it. That meant she needed to be held before she got to the palace. Loved before she was tested. Given something to stand on. What I had not anticipated was how the strategic approach to protecting her was going to intersect with my own completely unplanned feelings about a certain very composed man in white robes who noticed things other people missed. My spice blend took a long time to develop to the standard I needed. The base involved Sichuan pepper and orange peel and 3 other components I have never written down for anyone. The ratios were mine and would stay mine. But the result, applied to a properly prepared bird over a correctly managed fire, produced something that crossed the ordinary category of food and entered the category of things that made a person stop mid-bite and pay attention. Wei Jing, as I had read him in the novel, was composed and self-contained, almost never seen eating publicly, which I had initially filed as a simple character detail and later understood meant he was selective in a way that most people were not. He did not give his attention to things that did not merit it. He was waiting for things worth noticing. The chicken was worth noticing. I made sure of it. I want to be honest. The plan was entirely about protecting my 30 chickens to build the trust of the one person Prince Yang actually deferred to. If Wei Jing was on our side, Prince Yang was manageable. That was the complete and total extent of what I was trying to accomplish. I had not planned for Wei Jing himself. He was the quietest significant presence I had ever encountered. Everything about him communicated nothing and somehow arrived as something. He made observations short in words and long in what they opened up. He thought before he spoke, which sounds ordinary and in practice was rare enough to be remarkable. He paid attention in the specific way that makes the person receiving it feel that they are worth the attention. He asked me, on the mountain, what I had liked about Jiang Nan. And I talked for 20 minutes. The sound the canal made at night, like it had something on its mind. The quality of light on white walls in the early morning before it had found a direction yet. The flower sellers calling across the water from their painted boats. The fish still moving in the market buckets. He listened to all of it. Then he said, "You notice things very carefully," and I understood that he had been listening to how I noticed them, not just what I had noticed, and that the observation was about me and not just about Jiang Nan. I had chased a boy 3 streets for declaring his feelings in public. I had told my twice that romantic feelings directed at me personally made me want to find a new city. I had believed both of these things completely and had every intention of continuing to believe them. I had not accounted for someone who made no declaration and no performance and simply showed up with full attention, consistently, treating who I actually was as something worth making space for. When he asked me, on the mountain, with the pine trees and the sound of water and the elders' hall behind us, I said yes before I had finished deciding. I said it and did not regret it for a single day after. My little brother-in-law was exactly as I had expected him to be and also in some ways not. He was loud and convinced of himself and occasionally very trying. He said things without the layer of social editing that most people applied, which produced honesty at some cost to comfort. He was impatient. He pushed limits as a matter of course and had done so his entire life. He was also, under all of that, loyal in the way that the best people are loyal, not because the situation was perfect but because he had decided someone was his and he was going to show up for them regardless. He kept his word. He was present. These were not small things and I did not undervalue them. The bloodline suppression required no effort on my part. My husband simply existed in Prince Yang's proximity and the effect was immediate and lasting. Years of being managed by someone who combined genuine care with genuine consequences had produced a very effective result. All I had to do was be Wei Jing's wife and Prince Yang's difficult edges stayed, if not fully smoothed, at least directed somewhere less harmful. I watched my stop making herself small. It happened over months and then years, gradually and then decisively. I would see her in a room full of people and she would simply be there, present and grounded, not pressed against the wall. I would hear her laugh and it would be real and unhurried and she would not apologize for it afterward. Good, I thought every time. That is the whole story of how we transmigrated into a novel and changed its ending. My parents adjusted to the second life with the practical competence of 2 people who had faced harder surprises than an unexpected setting change. My father regained enough of the original owner's memories to navigate the first year. My mother made the household function better within 6 months than it had in years. We were minor characters briefly mentioned in 2 chapters, and we rewrote our parts so thoroughly that by the end there was no version of the story in which we were minor at all. Mei became the 6th prince's official wife. I became the empress's sister-in-law. Zhou started a school that is still running. The 6th prince, who in the original story was dead by 30, is still very much alive, still saying things that make Mei hit him with cushions, still thinking loudly in ways that she receives clearly and I only know about secondhand. He calls her chrysanthemum when he thinks she cannot hear him. She always can. He knows. He does it anyway. And that is where we leave them. If you stayed all the way to the very end of this story, then you already know you belong here. Come find us every week at Lotus Tale Studios, where we bring you stories worth losing sleep over, told the way they deserve to be told. Subscribe if you have not already, ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload, and leave a comment below telling us which moment in this story hit you the hardest. Was it the chrysanthemum? The chicken? The mountain? Or Huan Huan? Share this with someone who needs a good story today. We will see you next time with another one.